Hey everyone, welcome to Between the Lines. This will be a discussion of the 2022 Emmy nominees for Outstanding Writing for a Limited or Anthology Series. For those watching this who don't know me, I'm Lauren O'Connor. I will be your MC during this in-depth chat with the nominated writers. I'm a librarian at the Writers Guild Foundation Library, which is now open again during the week by appointment only. It feels good to say that. If you haven't stopped in to see us yet, you can make an appointment by going to wgfoundation.org. So here's what's going to happen, just to kind of keep everybody in the loop. First, we're going to view a short but really great clip reel, just to show everybody the scenes we'll be talking about today. Then I will introduce our panelists. Then we'll talk together about writing limited series more generally. Then we'll break down scenes with pages on screen. Then, if there's time left at the end, we might, emphasis on might, be able to take some Zoom audience questions. So I hope that sounds good to everybody. Let's roll the clip reel. All right, huge applause, or should I say snaps. So now let's go ahead and introduce the writers of the clips that you just saw. And I'd like to do this in the form of a roll call. So when I say your name, I want to know two things. One, will you tell us the show you're nominated for? And then I want you to think about when you were first learning to write for TV or for the screen, and just tell us one thing that really helped you get a feel for it and know what you were doing, or something that just inspired you as you were learning. And we'll go in reverse alphabetical order by show title. So we're going to start with Patrick.
Hi, I'm Patrick Somerville. I'm nominated for Station 11. I'm not sure how to answer that question because it never really feels like I know what I am doing, but I will say I tried very hard to write a video game when I was 7 years old, and I wrote it on a legal pad and mailed it to Nintendo. And I think for the times that little characters talked, I ended up writing, giant tree branching conversations or trying to figure out how that would work. So I would say that was the beginning of trying to figure out how to write for the screen.
Gotcha.
They didn't want the game, by the way. They never wrote that.
Well, that's unfortunate for them. Next, let's go to Molly Smith Metzler.
Hi, Lauren. I'm Molly. I am recommended. I'm nominated for Maid. I'm so glad to be here. And I love your question. I've been thinking about it. And my very first room for television was in New York City. And I really only had written plays and hung out with playwrights and lived in this world where we could write, a 2-page monologue, and that was sort of expected and cool. And so my first job was with Steve McQueen. We were working on a mini series for HBO called Codes of Conduct. And it was my very first episode of television. And I decided to open it with, the characteristic playwrighty 2-page monologue. And my first lesson was when he said, Molly, and he kind of very, very sweetly, very privately was like, you get this line. And he circled one of them. And I was like, oh, okay, thank you for the lesson. So good lesson to get. I'm a good person.
Totally. All right, so we'll move next, speaking of playwrights, to Sarah Burgess.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm nominated for Impeachment, American Crime Story, and very, very happy to be here. I have a story kind of like Molly's, eerily like Molly's, because we come from the same background. So I guess I'll think about a different story, which is like, I went to film school at NYU actually for my college experience. And then I was in theater for a long time and have come back to screen. But we had this really cranky photography teacher who was, I remember like sort of ranting once during a lecture to us, but he said this one thing about, I just remember him, he clearly had some like bad photography, like cinematography experience recently. I don't know what had happened, but he was like, the most you can ask for in this industry is to have like a chance to do it again. And it was really helpful. I mean, that's true of like literally anything. So it's like I'm sure madly not precise answer to your question, but like, it was very freeing, I guess. And it was sort of like, especially in that time in film school when everyone thought they were going to be like a little Stanley Kubrick. It was such a great reminder that you're on your own road. And You can't control the outcome of everything. It was, I don't know, I remember that to this day. I think about it all the time.
That's good advice too. So next, we'll move to Liz Meriwether.
Hi, I'm nominated for the Dropout, and that was just such an amazing clip pack. Like, everyone here is so incredibly talented, and I'm so happy to be here and meet some of you. I was just thinking of different things while you guys were talking. That I very strangely took a sitcom writing class in college. I don't remember any part of it except for the teacher just really firmly said never set a scene at dusk because it's too expensive, and I have always remembered that you never set a scene at dusk. Yeah, and then I think the real answer is that when I was a playwright, I was in New York and I had a play that was a robot Hedda Gabler called Hedatron. And I sat in the audience because I didn't have a life. I just sat in the audience for every performance. And I think watching different audiences react to the play on different nights, I learned so much about just what makes people laugh and what things I thought were funny that weren't. And I don't know. So that was a really big lesson. And also don't set scenes at dusk.
That's excellent. Thank you. Danny Strong.
Hi, I'm Danny Strong. I did Dopesick, and I too, like Liz, was blown away by that clip package. Each scene was more riveting than the next. It was really powerful stuff. When I graduated college, I worked at Gary Ross's company as the office runner. And Gary Ross, for those who don't know, although I'm sure everyone here would know, he wrote Big and Dave and Pleasantville and Hunger Games, and legendary screenwriter. And my job was to pick up Diet Coke and laundry, and I think I was really good at it. I really got that Diet Coke in on time. And he saw that I had a screenwriting book and that I was interested in writing. And I didn't talk to him a lot. I was actually very intimidated by him, although he was nice to me, but I just was so, out of school intimidated by Gary Ross. And he saw I wanted to be a writer, and then he took me aside and just started talking to me about writing. And he said something, he said, going into the third act, make sure you're not just tying up the plot, but you're tying up the character's arc. And it always stuck with me as such a really great piece of advice that make it, when you're ending your story, make it about the character, not about resolving the plot. So there was my big tip from Gary Ross.
That's great too. Thank you guys. That's all really good advice. I also just want to give a shout out to Mike White, who's nominated for the White Lotus, but couldn't be here with us. He should get his flowers too. Yeah. So I think we've got 15 minutes here before I want to, dive into those scenes that we saw in the clip package. So I just have a few general questions for you guys. So limited series and anthology series have really kind of come into their own during the past decade. And my first question for you all is, what makes a story well suited for a limited series as opposed to another format? If you're creating a limited series, what are those core elements that you've got to have to make it work? And we're going to start with Patrick because
I'm waiting for everyone else to answer because I have no idea. No. I mean, I can say some things for sure, but when you're in it, I don't know if this is everyone else's experience too in making it. You don't really think about it like that. But I think the marketplace has done a thing that sort of invites this, and I think casting is a part of it too, and how long people want to commit. But for Station 11, it was too complicated of a story. It had too many complicated people and too many timelines to work as a movie. That felt true. I loved that novel, and when I heard they were developing it as a movie, it just felt like there's no way you could do those layers and that amount of density in that amount of time. So I guess I'll back into my answer and say that a limited series feels just right when you get to have a real ending. That I think when you work on a serialized television show, you're always in this kind of bizarro world of ending seasons but not ending the story, but you don't know quite if you're going to get picked up, so you're doing this halfway thing, and it can be done really, really well, but it's in a limited series, you know, the end is the end. And I think that really informs what you do in episode 2 even. There's a kind of, I don't know, I have found there's a kind of unity in the process when you're making a limited series that isn't there kind of in the old way of making serialized television. I don't know if that's like a reason why it should be a limited series, but I would say there's a certain new confidence you have when you know you're making one, at least.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
I think it's a great genre art form. I think for me as an audience member, it's some of my favorite stuff of the last several years of literally anything, of ongoing movies, theater, novels. I've just been loving limited series. And I think what it does is you kind of get the best of all worlds with it, and that you get the ongoing depth that you might not necessarily get in a 2-hour movie. And yet simultaneously, you're building to an actual ending that you want to be satisfying and definitive, as opposed to in an ongoing show, which is, you know, what Patrick just said, right? Which is, you hope there's going to be a next season. And by the way, I find that ongoing shows that are great in season 3 or 4, I find that miraculous. You know, I'm so in awe of those writers and those showrunners when they're able to keep those shows going. You know, that dynamically for so long. But there's a certain, I think, sweet spot in limited where you get some time, you get some depth, and yet simultaneously you get to build to a powerful conclusion.
For sure.
I also think like I totally agree with everything you guys said, but it's such a like it's its own way of telling stories, which I think is really important. Like, it's not a long movie. I think I'm thinking about the People versus OJ, because that was a really sort of influential one for me. But the episode where it was all in Marsha's perspective, you know, and I just, you know, basically stole that for The Dropout. But there's an episode of The Dropout that's, you know, in the sort of, it's called Old White Men, but just to be able to switch perspectives in that way, I mean, to me is such a really fascinating tool for storytelling that I think like a limited can really do. And a movie, it's like, you know, you're not going to get that as much. And that's like what is amazing for stories like Danny was saying that have a lot of complexity and, you know, that take place over a lot of years that you really want to dig into. But I adore it, and like I want to keep doing it. And having done a show for 7 years where we had to like at the, you know, it's like you're at the 5th season finale and you're like, they're still all living together in a loft and they're in their 30s now, and like what's happening? So it was so incredible to be able to like actually end a story, you know.
For sure.
Yeah, what Liz just said is like literally the only way we could navigate Station 11 too. That it was too complicated otherwise. So like the episodic structure gave characters a chance to be centered, and in a different way. I co-sign, it is not a 10-hour movie. Episodes for life.
I have kind of a second part to that question. Since all of these shows are based on pre-existing material, and we're talking about, you know, limited series that go on for, you know, 10 episodes, I'd like to talk about plotting. How do you figure out, you know, when you're adapting something like this, like the major turning points of the story, and how do you shape your episodes? How do you get that build and all of it out? Molly?
Well, thank you. I'm thinking about the last question too, and I think it has to do with this question, which to me, the first step is always, what is the movie and why don't I want to do that as the movie? You know, like I think there's a lot of people who wanted to make Maid into a movie, like a very sad, independent 1.5 hour, you know, just sad fest. And what I loved about the book, was also what I found incredibly challenging about the book, which is that there was not a lot of plot. It's a, you know, you spend this time with her and you learn a lot, but it's just kind of a slog. And so when we sat down, you know, what I really wanted to dramatize was the cycle of abuse and how we get stuck in it and what that looks like. And the reason I fought hard to do this as a limited and then fought to do it as 10, not 6, is that you have to take up some space to show people what that cycle looks like. You know, it takes time. You have to watch her and you have to earn 10 hours with it, you know? So I think it wasn't a surprise when we sat down to staff the Maid writers' room and we hired a lot of playwrights who are used to creating drama and creating high stakes out of just people living their lives, talking, their relationships, the way we get trapped with people. So we really started, when we broke it, we started with like, what are the relationships here? Who are we going to care about? How do we flesh out this world? And then kind of like, what's our cliffhanger? And just as an anecdote, the kind of most dramatic thing that happens in the book is the car accident, and it happens just near the end of the book. And, you know, immediately we made a decision to put that in the pilot. And so it's just kind of that, like, you know, how do we raise the stakes immediately and keep them super duper high, but make this an emotional experience? So that's where we started. I'm curious what you guys did.
I also am curious.
I think that like what Liz said about a limited series, like the mode of storytelling and characterization, inviting maybe even a whole episode that's singularly in one point of view, was where I started with this show. And I think for me, I guess plotting came from, I don't know, there's like so many, like 8 to 10 major points of view that we introduced. And it's like some random secretary, and then like Paula Jones, who's a woman from Arkansas who Bill Clinton sexually harassed, all these extremely disconnected stories and people all across the country. And then plot and story came from these extremely well-documented events, bringing them in collision with each other. And so the story changes kind of violently after episode 6. And we are then suddenly in the Clintons' point of view, and there's almost a disorienting amount of perspectives and interactions between those people. So that those separate points of view colliding, and then some of those people now in rooms together, is sort of where that was, I think, underneath all the sort of storytelling and plot choices that I made.
I want to throw in another part to this question. Feel free to answer what I just asked, but and spare no detail here. Are you outliners? Do you use a whiteboard, note cards? What does that process look like? And how do you keep track of all those? I mean, because there are a lot of threads in each one of these series. How do you keep track of all of that? Danny?
Well, we had in our writers room, we had to have a whiteboard of all of the different prototypes that she built that didn't work, and then we started just like listing the ways that they didn't work, but like it was like I keeping track of just like I'm everybody on this Zoom has these like massive stories, but just like keeping track of like years of factual information, and then kind of like what we wanted to do inside of that factual information, and then having to justify it to legal. I mean, it was like just kind of having to keep all of it in your head and be able to like pull details at moments when you needed them, you know, to be like, well, actually, you know, this happened in 2007, you know. So I mean, it was that was sort of a really big undertaking, but I mean, personally, I think like it was my first time being writing a drama, so it was like I was really used to outlining a comedy structure. So it was like when there were 2 more acts, I was like, no. I was like, but I also feel like years of kind of like of really having to be clear and structured in a network sitcom space, it kind of helped me keep track of all of those different like threads, because there was a lot to keep track of. And then I think, I mean, the people in my room are very good at outlining, and I am somebody who kind of waits till the last moment and freaks out and stays up all night. So I'm not I'm not organized.
Does anyone else have any wisdom on how you keep track of everything? Because that was, as I was like watching all of this, that was like my major question. I was like, how does one?
I am not an organized person at all. Many very, very talented ADs, many very, very talented second ADs, many very talented HODs, pretty much the entire crew, all kind of working together because, yeah, I'm not organized either.
I'm not organized either, but I do have like a principle that's really important, which is that I do think the writer's room has to be private. And I with the show like Maid, I felt especially just kind of like I mean, honestly, God bless Netflix for letting us make the show because we didn't share a lot. We didn't submit outlines and horrible season documents. And I just really think we aren't writers of documents, we're writers of scripts. And even though in the room, we would beat it out and outline, but that was an internal document that we would work from. And it was kind of personalized to the different writer. And I don't know, I didn't know going in that I would get away with that. But the fact is, it really helped us write the show, that we had the privacy to kind of be personal with it and make it our own. So I've been on a million shows where I had to diligently outline, and that works too. But for Maid, we needed privacy. What would you guys do?
The opposite.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'm like, that sounds so amazing.
What network again?
Privacy. They're here right now watching this, and they're going to give me notes afterwards of how I did. I'm a big outliner. It's sort of just a process for me. I start with notes, and every step of this, by the way, is designed to put as little pressure on myself as possible. So it's like I kind of I'm trying to like constantly play head games with myself that it's not bad. So like I do notes first and compile data, and then I start to come up with ideas, and then it turns into outlines, and then eventually the drafts. But I do outline very meticulously, but when I go to draft, I'm very comfortable ditching anything on an outline, cutting scenes, just restructuring as I go. And I used to not have to look at the outline a lot. Now I'm like constantly forgetting. I'm like, well, what the hell happens next? So I like go back to the outline. But yeah, that's basically the process. And in this, we shut down, our writer's room shut down a week in. So we were a full pandemic writer's room. So we didn't have whiteboards. And I very quickly was sort of uncomfortable with getting notes every day. I just wanted to take them myself. So I became sort of the showrunner and the writer's assistant. And by the way, I had a great writer's assistant, but it was like I really needed to do it myself at the same time because there was so much information and all these timelines. And it was, I actually found it really helpful because I just kept getting this information over and over again by taking notes simultaneously as we were breaking story.
That's so interesting. When you were talking, it made me realize that I feel like what I think your show does so well, and what we were sort of trying to do, was doing all that research, doing all of that sort of outlining, but then really trying to like leave it behind, which I think is like, I think for the shows that are based in the real world sort of, this happened at this moment kind of thing, there's a moment when you have to leave it behind and tell the emotional story and not, worry about kind of getting all the chronology and all of the legal stuff right, so it's interesting. It's like there's a moment for outlining, and then there really is, I think it's important to go in and kind of forget all of that, forget all the facts, kind of like try to just tell like the emotional story. And
yeah, well, you did an amazing job. I absolutely loved it.
I was fishing.
No,
I was
you,
like, you did
you nailed it, what
yeah.
you were going for. But
Yeah.
I totally agree, where it's exactly that for me, which is so much research, all this preparation, and then it's find the movie or find the episode. In exactly what Liz just said, let it go. And then I'll come back afterwards and do a kind of fact check, right? And then, but I'll plug it in to my narrative that's been constructed, as opposed to having the narrative be completely guided by the facts, if that makes sense. So it's like kind of going back and forth, but with the goal of at a certain point, you've just gotta write a movie or a TV show or a play, not a nonfiction book.
Am I the only writer here who didn't have to navigate like a legal team to change beats? I mean, I was adaptation is its own monster in and of itself, but man, that's crazy. Are there lawyers who will like
Sarah or Liz? Who got it worse, Sarah or Liz? That's what I want to know.
I don't know. I have a huge victim complex about it. So I'm
we have the same, I think the same lawyers we had to deal with, the 20th lawyers or
that's your team. That was your side, that's the other side. Yeah. Did the company have its own lawyers too?
Or Disney lawyers? Yeah, it was kind of the same. I think it might have been the same group of lawyers that we were all, because we're all
I think I was working with the Searchlight lawyer. There was one lawyer that I spoke to more than my family. It's just like, it was like, hey, hi again. It's me. Sarah, sorry.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, did you have to deal with, what was the like contact with the real people you were depicting? Did any of you have that in your life at that time too? Like Liz, did you have that at all?
We interviewed, we did our own interviews outside of the podcast interviews, which we also got, but we did our own interviews of like some of the sort of side characters like Edmund Koo and Anna Ariola, and just like these other, but we didn't speak directly to Elizabeth Holmes or Sunny Balwani because we couldn't legally, because they were going through a trial, which then happened while we were shooting. So I think the next thing I do, I'd really like to not talk to lawyers all the time, but
I want to toss in one final fun question here while we're all talking, and then we can dive into these scenes. I just want to make sure we have enough time to do that. I always ask this at this event because I think it's a really fun question. All these shows have these fabulously built out ensembles of characters. Do you have a process for naming these characters that you create, with their composites of people, or
open Emily's book. Look what Emily named that character.
Yeah.
It was easy for me.
I try to use names I haven't used before, and I'm sure we all have that. It gets to be, but I have a daughter, and so some of her friends who are really, really sweet, I'll like steal their names. And she has a friend named Alex, so I was like, perfect. So we stole Alex for Alex. But it's weird because Stephanie Land's a real person, but everyone in the book, their names are disguised, and then we had to further disguise them. So we might actually have circled back to the actual names. I'm not sure, but there was so much renaming in Maid. We would all try to find names that we hadn't used in our other shows. It's not very creative, but also necessary.
Anyone else?
All right, I'm gonna come clean. I just go to Google, I type in Appalachian names, the list comes down. I pick a first name I like, then I go to Appalachian last names, and then I pick a last name that I like, that I think feels right. That's there. I said it. All right. Are you happy?
Whatever works for you.
That's basically it. Yeah. Sometimes I dwell, Michael Keaton's character, his name, yes, has meaning. The smaller the character, the faster I want to come up with a name. And then for a really small character, not that there aren't small characters, but since I played small characters all through my 20s, I'm fine saying this. I sometimes put like, a blonde guy, whatever, literally for the reader. So the reader knows you don't need to pay attention to this person. This isn't a thing. It's just a moment in the script. So I'll often do names like that for the sake of the read. That's
great. Okay. So let's dive into each of these individual scenes. I think we'll get the best flow if we go in the order of that clip reel. So Casey's going to be sharing her screen with us, and we're all going to be really sweet because it's her first time doing this event. So I think we'll start. Start with
don't Casey. Mess this up, Casey. Come on.
Yeah, don't fuck it up.
So we're going to start with the Dropout. The episode is titled "I'm in a Hurry." and it's written by Liz Meriwether. So
Good
my
show,
first
Casey.
question for you, Liz, is actually, so the title of this episode comes from that Alabama song, I'm in a Hurry. And Elizabeth Holmes is like really motivated by this song. And my question for you is, where did this come from? Did this like help you in conceiving of the episode?
It was in Elizabeth Holmes' yearbook when she was a senior in high school, and it was, I guess, her favorite song. And it was
Wow.
something that I found out, like, when I was researching, and I was like, you're kidding me. Like it was like, oh, this is like this song is like her whole sort of mission in life.
Mhm.
Like, so it was one of those moments, just it felt like a writer gift in a way, just like this is it really helped me actually understand her, because the song is about moving too fast, moving so fast you don't enjoy life. And I mean, Alabama said it better.
Yeah, I mean,
than
it's
me,
eerie
but
how perfect it is.
yeah.
And
But that's what
music.
that first episode was like. I think it was really that song actually really helped me with the structure of the first episode, because it was a really hard episode to find a flow for, because it covered so many years, like and I didn't want it to feel episodic. Like I was really trying to kind of tell the same emotional story throughout, as opposed to like, now she's a kid, now she's in college, now she's dropped out. So it was helpful to just focus on, okay, this is a character who has is just running forward, it wants to move as fast as possible throughout every part of her life and doesn't want to stop. So that was just like a really helpful thing to think about.
For sure. And to your point about structure, you kind of touched on this earlier, but I mean, you've created shows, TV comedies before, and I'm interested in generally how conceiving a first episode of a limited series is different from conceiving the first episode of a regular series. Like, how do you have to think differently?
Well, it was amazing. It was so fun to write, as opposed to a sitcom pilot where you have to introduce 5 characters that you're trying to, it's basically a sales tool, a sitcom pilot where you're like, this is these 5 characters you're gonna have to like get to know really quickly, and also see what the game of the show is, and then see how it could run for 7 years. I mean, what was amazing about this was to be able to just dig in on a character and kind of set that character going on the story that they're on. And I mean, like I said, what was hard was that I knew I wanted to go back into her childhood, but I just felt like the audience wasn't going to want to stay there for very long. So it was just a lot of like, how do I kind of go back and show her childhood without feeling like I was being indulgent about that, it was like
Sure.
too much of kind of her backstory. And I went into the show being like, I will not do deposition scenes. Like that has been done too many times before. And then immediately wrote a deposition. Because it was
Did it start as
like
deposition voiceover first? Just
Yeah.
deposition voiceover.
Sometimes you just need the deposition.
Well, it was just like, how do we, like, how can we tell the audience that there's more to come, but still like, then move back in time to, anyway, but that was sort of that was my struggle for the first episode.
Gotcha. So I love this scene. I loved it in the clip package. I'm curious if you can recall, why did you choose to share this with us, this scene?
I don't think I actually chose it, but I'm so glad somebody did.
But here's
no, but I really, this was one of my favorite scenes in this episode to write, just because like I said, the structure of the episode is like she's in a hurry, she's moving, and then this was the first time that someone just says no to her, and everything just stops. And that, so it was the first time that she kind of hits an obstacle that she can't kind of talk her way out of, or widen her eyes her way out of.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
and I love that. I love Phyllis Gardner. I got to interview her in the real Phyllis Gardner. I love the way she talked in the interview. And I love kind of putting those two women in like a collision course with each other, and I really also just like relate it to Elizabeth in this moment, like of just that kind of awkward college student who sort of thinks that they understand the world, and who everyone has sort of always said like, good job to, getting like a real taste of reality for the first time. And it was a really fun scene to write, and I actually ended up writing most of the dialogue in the outline just because I got going with it.
Casey, let us see scroll a little bit so we can see some of this good dialogue here.
This is crazy that you're pulling up script pages. Like I think
it's great. I love it.
I had like a nightmare about this but I'm like naked, but it's happening. Like I don't even know what's in here. Oh my God. Okay.
If we go slowly and elegantly down to the bottom here, where she quotes Yoda from Star Wars, my question here is, did Elizabeth Holmes really have an affinity for Star Wars, or is that just something?
No, yeah, that's real. That's definitely real. She that quote was painted on the wall in the main sort of office for Theranos. So I knew that, and so I was kind of like, I wanted to obviously work back from knowing that it was painted on the wall to kind of like the origin story of that idea. And it also just, I don't know, I mean, it feels so that moment in time in Silicon Valley where it's kind of like kind of grabbing onto those, platitudes and kind of making them into the basis for the cult that you're starting. And so I always just thought that was a really funny and absurd and maddening kind of like thing that she clung to.
Got it. So last question for you. When watching The Dropout, I find Elizabeth to be just kind of this relatable weirdo. And I want to know if, while developing the series, there was something that you connected to with her that helped you write her and get her voice and sensibility onto the page.
Yeah, I mean, so much, an embarrassing amount. We have the same name. No, I felt I was 29 when New Girl started, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I lost my voice the first week of the writer's room, and I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and he said, have you been drinking a lot of coffee and or trying to sound authoritative? So I just like went into the show kind of understanding this idea of feeling like you're feeling wrong in a position of power and wanting to kind of change yourself to be a better leader, because you feel uncomfortable in your own skin. Like I just really understood that. And I mean, I've never committed wide scale fraud, but I did understand a lot of the emotion in the early part of her character.
Yeah, and as a viewer, like I understand it watching it too, so thank you, Liz. It's really hard to go first, so I appreciate it.
I know that was really terrifying. I'm so glad it's over. I can't wait to see
your M dashes are amazing though. I mean, you're just really crisp, and you were taking
everybody does a different thing, bro.
Yeah. All right, so next we'll move into Impeachment, American Crime Story. The episode is called Manhandled, and it's written by Sarah Burgess. So Sarah, Can you tell us a little bit about, and just forewarning everybody, I'm kind of starting with this question. Can you tell us a little bit about the title for this episode and where it came from? At what point did you know it was going to be called Manhandled, and did it play a role in how you shaped the episode?
It's a funny story with this title. This title changed after the episode was shot, actually. Ryan Murphy directed this episode. I had a different title. It was called Prom Night through much of shooting, which is like the Office of the Independent Counsel, which is like the prosecutors who held Monica Lewinsky in the hotel room, which is what happens in this episode. Monica was braced by the FBI and prosecutors and held in the hotel room. Their code name for it was Prom Night inside their office. Ryan got so inspired when he directed this episode and got really, really excited about titling it Manhandled. And so he spoke to me and it changed after we shot it. So it had actually no contact with my writing process, this title.
Gotcha. So this is kind of a bottle episode. I mean, between the mall and the hotel room and Monica being held by this investigation team. Can you talk about coming up with this episode and the decision to do it in this contained sort of way?
Yeah, it's a turning point in this whole story. It was like, I think very, very early on, really clear that we would spend an entire episode in this like 12 hours where she was held there, and that the perspectives would sort of change after this for the rest of the show, actually. I was thinking about, you guys were speaking so elegantly about like well-documented history and taking facts. And then like, when do you get to that place where you're inside a character and you take all the breaks off and you're actually just writing, and that's always what writing is. This episode and this story, like to some degree did put just restraints on me, right? You have to tell the story as it was written, in part because the real person was a producer and involved, and like Monica was traumatized by the media. I don't personally, me, Sarah Burgess, want to be the person re-traumatizing her. Like that doesn't seem like what I want to do with 2 years of my life. So it was a collaboration with the real person, which of course is going to pull the document closer to reality. Not to mention, this is so well documented, in many people's opinion, over well documented, this story, right? So familiar, it's part of our national lore. The FBI itself has a timeline. Like the FBI basically outlined this episode for me because there were so many investigations of this day. So I was surprised when I wrote this. I thought I would hate those restraints. I also don't really write drama or melodrama. And so it's like, where is my chance to write like glib? I write like slick Wall Street comedies. So I was like, how did I end up writing this? Like I'm writing a moment of extreme emotion, a non-verbal emotion. Much of this like story of this episode is these guys thought Monica would just be scared, and they presented her with evidence that she had committed perjury. And they thought that she would turn on Bill Clinton and immediately cooperate with the government to take him down. But instead, like a human being, she was really upset and recognized that her life was fundamentally changed and was extremely emotional for many, many hours. And so this scene, especially, which I'm like traumatized to see on screen, but is like, it's more upsetting than I thought, it was so hard for me to figure out how to express that emotion. When do you bring Monica to that place? Can you have a full hour of her just sort of keening, It was a real challenge for me outside my comfort zone to sort of get to that place, express how she felt, keep the audience on her side, and make sure that to some degree, that I'm still accurate, and that Monica herself won't feel like re-traumatized by it. So all of those things were in play. It was a very different writing experience from any I've ever had writing this episode.
So can you just like, not to like traumatize you looking at the pages, but can you just talk about writing this scene and what's kind of going through your head as you're putting pen to paper, and specifically that line, like, Linda, what did you do?
Monica basically said these things, this is a real thing that happened in this hotel room that was actually extremely dramatic and extremely personal and very emotional and full of rage. At the very beginning of this event, Monica really literally said, like, they brought Linda Tripp into the hotel room with her, and she kept looking at Linda, and the prosecutors were like, okay, she's distracted, like, get Linda Tripp out of here. And Monica actually said, make her stay and watch. I want that treacherous bitch to see what she did to me. Like, that is actual dialogue from real life. So that's like the waters I was swimming in to figure out how to place that in the scene and get to that, that emotional temperature. So I was pulling that in. At a certain point, you get into a way to sort of it's using words to basically non-verbally express the surreal terror that Monica feels as she sort of puts this together. She's been in a wrenching, heartbreaking personal situation, but this is like, I don't know. I mean, of course she didn't foresee this betrayal. So all of this is sort of, her mind is her mind is in this moment, in this scene, finally, she now has the information to understand what's happened. So her mind is finally grappling with this. So I think the challenge was how to express that in stage directions and dialogue. And frankly, in this, I'm coming into a pre-existing franchise. I'm also writing a script for Ryan Murphy, for Monica, for the process that I was in, to make sure I'm writing something legible that is super clear about the intentions of the scene too. And that kind of can change as you get closer to production, if that makes sense.
For sure. So speaking of writing it for Ryan, writing it for Monica, you actually consulted with Monica Lewinsky on this project. And I just wonder how her input, affected this episode. And can you give us an example of something that actually came from her?
This episode, I felt very, the process we landed on, Monica would read every script and give notes, written notes on every page. And for some episodes, that was a more challenging and sort of, I think for probably both of us, confrontational and complicated sort of dialogue than others. This one was pretty seamless. She was pretty happy with the first draft of this episode, which I was very grateful to hear. And I felt very good about. There's some lines, I think especially about, later in the episode, this thing happens, Monica tells the feds her mom was going to come. And so when her mother finally arrives, Monica had a lot of memories and input about things her mom actually said to her. I think her mom said to her, Monica was very focused on protecting Bill Clinton, on contacting Bill Clinton to tell him there's like a trap for you, there's a conspiracy to get you. And her mom kept stopping her from calling him. And I think her mom actually said to her, "I'm not Bill Clinton's mother, I'm your mother," I'm pretty sure. So I think that line comes from Monica herself, from the real event. So there were things like that on the margins for this episode. This episode specifically did not change a ton, in part, again, because it is so well documented, and she wrote a memoir in 2001. So I had so much to work with that it didn't alter dramatically after she read it.
Do you have any tips for writers who are consulting with a real life person, then have to sit down and write them as a character? How do you keep from being stifled doing that? Because I can't even imagine.
Good question, Lauren. I mean, I actually wrote probably 3 episodes before I met Monica. Also, I wrote a lot of the show from the point of view of Linda Tripp. So much of the sort of action at the beginning of the show and a lot of the events are seen through the eyes of not Monica, but I think there was a process that allowed me to write and explore that character before I would get to that point. That was probably, I would imagine, very helpful and important. It depends on what, in this situation, she was a producer. So you always have to take every note, no one wants a ton of notes from anybody, and you take some notes and don't take others. And you're like any producer, you're developing a relationship and hopefully trust so that you can have those conversations even when they're a little complicated, but there's always going to be, especially in this case, there'll always be sort of red lines where in things that you, it's just morally, you're gonna take what that person says and follow it, So I think each situation is different, but I think some independence at the beginning was very helpful, I think.
That's very great. Thank you. Thanks so much. Congrats. And we're going to move now to Dopesick, The People versus Purdue Pharma, written by Danny Strong.
Okay.
So as I said, I'm going to ask everybody this. Tell us about the title for this episode, The People versus Purdue Pharma. At what point did you know this would be the title? It has kind of it suggests kind of a showdown or obligatory episode or something.
Well, it's the finale of the season, of the story, and there's 2 sort of major events of this, which is the conclusion of the case that the prosecutors are putting together. So I liked the idea that it had a legal name because we were doing a case, right? We've been doing through the whole season, but this episode was the conclusion of it. But I particularly like the people versus Purdue Pharma, because in the last act, the parents, these characters that we've never seen through the whole show, finally get to have their say and get to, in court, testify at a sentencing hearing in front of the executives to tell them what they did to their children. And so to me, that was the people versus Purdue Pharma.
Gotcha. So one of my favorite things about Dopesick is actually the connection between Dr. Phoenix and Betsy. The way you shaped that, it makes it all the more gut-wrenching when she, spoiler alert, passes away. I wonder if you can talk about how you approached their doctor-patient relationship and getting us emotionally invested in it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's sort of the emotional spine of the whole piece, right? I've got these sort of procedural storylines of people trying to bring a case against Purdue Pharma, against our villains. We're with Purdue Pharma. But the heart of the piece is the story of Purdue's victims. And that's personified with these two characters that both get addicted and go on two separate addiction journeys. But one of them is responsible for the other one's journey and cares so deeply about this person and vice versa. So it was, this relationship that goes through, they split apart at a certain point, they come back together for a moment, but their paths are mirroring each other through this harrowing addiction journey in which these two characters are both very much the victims of the lies of this company, Purdue Pharma.
And the scene that we're looking at, I think you said earlier that you didn't remember that this was the one that you decided to share, but my question is, why did you choose this scene to share with us?
I think you guys wanted like a 90-second scene, and I'm like, well, this is pretty good. It's 90 seconds.
Yeah.
I really love the scene, but a lot of that's because of Michael Keaton's performance in it. Like he's so incredible in the whole show. But there's a moment in this scene when he apologizes to him. And I just remember every time I was cutting it, and I'd be by myself in a room, with my editor through the Evercast. And every time the Keaton would do that moment where he apologized, I'd like look around like, can you believe this fucking actor? Except I was by myself. So it was a little weird. But I loved Keaton in the scene. This scene's inevitable, right? Because his character has to have a moment in which he comes to terms with Betsy's death and which he had done, because he's directly responsible for it. But I wanted it to feel as real as possible. I didn't want it to have a happy resolution with the parents. And I didn't want it to be an explosive of like, I hate you. I wanted it to just feel like how this would really happen. And it's very unsatisfying for him as a character. He's going there to do something, to apologize, to get something, and they won't give it to him. But then the real moment of the scene for me, the real turn of the scene, is just the final moment of the scene when Betsy's father pulls out a flask and takes a drink. And he's never drunk once. We've never heard he was a drinker or a former alcoholic or anything. So we don't even know if there's a past there, but we do know that because of his journey of what he's had to go through because of Purdue's lies, he now has to numb his pain with alcohol. So a new addiction has become. So that was the ultimate the ultimate goal of the scene was to in many ways give Jerry, beautifully played by Ray McKinnon, what an actor, right? To give him the final moment of his arc of the season.
I'm so glad you hit on that, because that was actually one of my questions for you. Just talking about like the theme of the series being what is pain, and how is every character trying to alleviate their pain. And like I definitely noticed it when I was looking at these pages. Well, and the scene too, like, to the point of it being so short and like unsatisfying for Phoenix. Was there ever a point in time when this was like a longer, more drawn out moment?
I don't think so. I don't think it, I can't really remember. I directed this episode, and I remember, when we were doing the scene, feeling, that this was the length that it needed to be, right? That even though it wasn't really that long on the page, there was just a depth, I thought, with these actors and their performances and what they brought to it. And I didn't want it to be melodramatic, wailing and crying or screaming, because that just didn't feel real to me about how this would happen after everything that these people have gone through.
It's so incredible what he actually played on page 23 on the bottom, that line, when that's why I didn't go, or that's why I didn't, that line that he did, we scrolled away, but it was so, it's like 8 powerful moments in those 3 lines right there that Michael did. It's incredible.
What an actor, huh? What a great guy too. I love Michael. Michael Keaton's one of my childhood heroes. And sometimes when you meet a childhood hero, it doesn't go so great. It's usually a little disappointing. And in fact, with Keaton, it was the exact opposite. He's just the coolest guy and the most down-to-earth movie star I've ever dealt with. But yeah, thank you, Patrick. I couldn't agree with you more. Just the depth that he brought to that moment, to the whole scene, to the whole show.
That's a question I have for you, actually, Danny. Working with this amazing, ensemble of actors, was there anything, when you were actually making the show, was there anything that they brought to that changed your scripts or anything like that?
Well, what they brought is everything, right? I mean, they bring an emotional life and a power, and it was a great cast too, not just these assassins as actors, but they're great people too. I mean, we had such a positive experience. It doesn't always go that way either, right? There's usually sometimes maybe one on set that can take up a lot of time, and this was not that. This was like everyone was here, really focused. I'm very comfortable with actors sometimes being a little loose with the dialogue. I'm not one where if they change some wording, I don't have the script supervisor go over there and have them fix it. I just want them to be kind of free in the moment. And when it's usually a little loose like that, I usually like it because it just sounds kind of realer to me because they're doing something subconsciously. So not a lot of improv in this show, but I don't mind that either. Because often, my experience with actors is that they're really smart. And they're really thinking about this stuff, so that they bring, sometimes they'll bring, there'll be times where an actor will say, I'm having a hard time with this line. And I'll say, well, then just say whatever you want. And they'll be like, okay. And then they'll do that. And it's almost always great. I'm always really, really like it. Right. So unless there's a hard joke in there, unless I've actually written like a dun-dun-dun joke, which by the way is usually not funny if it's a dun-dun joke, but I still want to hear it. So unless there's something like that, I'm usually pretty loose, but it usually doesn't get very loose. It's just kind of often small tweaks that I'm really disinterested in correcting on set.
Thanks. Super helpful. Thank you. Congrats.
Oh, thank you.
We're gonna move now to sorry, I'm flying through these. Just trying to make
This is so interesting.
It's so happy. Interesting.
This is so great.
I could talk to each of you for an hour. But next we'll take a look at Maid, the episode Snaps, written by Molly Smith Metzler. So Snaps, like everyone else, Molly, I'm going to ask you too about the title for this episode. I realized when I finished watching it, it's a reference to the snaps that they give each other in their writing group after they share work. But I wonder if it means more than that. And at what point did you know this would be the title, and did it shape the episode at all?
Well, this is the finale. And so the finale does end on a positive note. I think she's going to have a very hard journey ahead of her, but she does reach the top of this mountain that she's been climbing for 10 episodes. And she does leave, break the cycle that she's in, leave with this abusive relationship. So there's a lot of actually hope and positivity at the end of the episode. So I did know Snaps was going to be the name because Snaps is positive. But the origin of Snaps, I think, is also a little bit painful, which is also right for this episode. But I did a lot of research for the show, and there's a lot of domestic violence groups of women that come together, much like what we see on screen in the finale. And when they share, not always creative writing, but when they share they don't clap, because if you are it can be traumatic. The sound of clapping can be traumatic to a survivor. So they snap. And when I saw that, I was like, just so moved by it. And I thought it was so beautiful. And it also feels a little like it became a sort of metaphor for the whole show, like how we support each other, that it's gentle, it's not. So anyway, that's sort of.
I love that. So why did you choose scene to share with us? And can you talk about where you were in your writing process when this scene came about?
Sure. You know, I was on set for the entire production. It was COVID, peak COVID, which I think a lot of us were dealing with. But I mean, I lived in Canada with these characters for 9 months, and I had the incredible good fortune to be writing this, you know, live. So I was writing it not while we were shooting it, but I wrote it right before we started shooting it. So it is custom written for these actors who had now become, you know, kind of friends, and I knew what their strengths were, and I knew how they felt about their characters. And so it reminded me of theater a little bit. Like, I really do feel like I wrote a lot of this episode with Margaret herself. And this scene in particular, first of all, I love seeing Billy Burke, because we don't get to see him all the time. And whenever he's on screen, I just think he's so spectacular. But what I loved about shooting this scene, it was one of the final days of shooting, and Margaret said to me, you know, I just feel like this is the scene where we see that Alex is broken this cycle, like how far she's come in these 10 episodes. And once Margaret said that, I couldn't kind of unsee that, because it's true. Like Alex's happy ending isn't about getting the people around her to acknowledge the truth or to see the truth. It's about her being able to see it. And I thought it was really fascinating, just as a character piece, that her father doesn't ever acknowledge what she's been through. His own denial is so thick, he can't give that to her. You know, it's really sad. They're probably never going to see each other again. And yet this is sort of the most healthy and well that we see this character. And I think we understand after this scene that she's going to be okay, or at least I did, and Margaret did.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about the line, "Is that who hit my mom? Booze?" Because I found that to be just like, wow, what a gut punch. Do you remember coming up with that, or you know, just kind of like walk us through writing the scene?
Well, you know, I think too, we've spent some time now with Alex and Hank together in the show, and their relationship isn't like this. She doesn't confront him, she doesn't ask anything of him, and she doesn't chase him. And I think, I don't know, to me in this moment, she's gonna chase him until he acknowledges what she's saying. You know, I was in a shelter. That's not part of this clip, but she starts by saying, I'm living in a shelter, and he can't say it and won't acknowledge it. And she's just chasing him and chasing him. And even in this moment of, you know, you can't say that it was alcohol that hit Mom. You have to say it was you. That's the truth. That's reality. That he's unable to say it. I don't know. To me, it was Alex kind of saying, I'm not gonna live in your lie anymore. And
yeah, for sure. So I'm also curious, you know, like your background is as a playwright. Does that affect how you approach each episode, or, you know, or the series as a whole? I mean, for example, like when you're writing this episode, do you approach it with like a dramatic question that you're trying to answer?
A little bit. It reminds me actually of what Danny said earlier about the third act. What your early lesson about the third act is to make sure it's not plot, it's that it has to do with your character. And I do think that there's something about that as a playwright, and I think maybe all playwrights are, I don't know, I think we might all do this, which is I like know the plot point, but it's sort of it's in the rear view. To me, it's always about the character and really wanting to spend time with them. And I think that's why my scene, you see a lot of words here, you know, sometimes you have to find it in the scene, you know, and not all the scenes are quite this verbal, but that's in part because Alex is finally able to articulate some of this. And so I'm just following her. Like it's, to me, the character kind of tells me. I know that sounds crunchy, but she kind of tells me.
Yeah. And then you know, so this is a scene between, you know, Alex and Hank, her father, and then there's Paula, her mother, and countless of other characters who weren't in Stephanie Land's memoir. Can you talk about developing them and sort of building out the ensemble?
Sure. So Stephanie, I mean, everyone should read the memoir. It's so heartbreaking and stunning, and she's a beautiful writer. It is not a natural fit for television for one reason, and that is that she doesn't talk to anyone. She's like a truly isolated human being. And she's kind of going through all this horror. It's really sort of like just she's such a hero, but she's going through all of it alone. So I think there's the sort of the first challenge was, you know, at least when I watch TV, I want to watch relationships. I want to watch someone grow with their relationships. So we kind of retained as much as we could of the book and what she learns about cleaning and like those relationships, but we definitely had to build out the father and Sean and the mother characters. They are referenced in the memoir, and you get the feeling they're kind of, you know, pieces of garbage people. But we really fleshed them out and made them, you know, I think made them kind of the backbone of this abuse that she's in, that it comes from somewhere. We inherited it, you know, we get it from our parents and then we get stuck in it and then we hand it down to our children. And in order to really understand what she is ending in a scene like this, I think we have to get to know the parents really well. So that was sort of the thinking there.
Gotcha. So throughout this series, you make urgency and raising the stakes feel so just like organic. That's like the only word I can think of to describe it. And can you give us an example? It doesn't have to be this moment, but somewhere in the series where you consciously went in and like made something more urgent. That's like what I want to learn from you.
Sure. Well, I think one example is I mentioned earlier that that horrible car accident where her daughter's upset and she gets out to get, you know, that happens at the end of the book, and we put it in the first episode because we wanted it to start it at 10. So that's one example. But another example I think is it's a moment on screen that I really love. It's at the end of episode 6, directed by Helen Shaver, who I love. And she has finally scored an apartment. She's scored an apartment. She's bartered to do the landscaping to get this apartment. She has moved in. Everything is going really, really well. And then, of course, you know, it could just feel like things are going to work out and it's a happy moment for her. But, you know, the instinct in the writer's room and then on set as well was, you know, it just doesn't work like that for this character. Something, the other shoe is always dropping. And so then immediately Sean is back and has drank too much and broken into the landlord's house. And it's so horrible because she loses this apartment because of her history, because of these characters that she's stuck with, you know, and Sean's not a villain either. He's just a victim of his own circumstance. But I think it's like, it was just one of those moments of you would never get ahead. And so we kept that in mind all the time, that most people in Alex's shoes are about $400 away from homelessness at all times. And so we just kept that ball in the air. You never get ahead. Did I answer your question?
Yes. No, that's really great. Thank you so much, Molly. Congrats. We're going to take it now to Station 11. The nominated episode is called Unbroken Circle, written by Patrick Somerville. So Patrick,
can I just say before we start, as a child of an alcoholic, thank you to both Molly and Danny for their accurate depiction of those things. And as a traumatized showrunner, thank you to Sarah and Liz for, I felt the same feeling when I saw pages projected onto a screen, you know, especially making shows during the pandemic. This is a safe place, but a lot of times this is a terrifying experience. So all you guys are great. I've loved listening to everything everyone has said.
Thanks so much for articulating that. That's really great. So Patrick, as I've asked everyone, where did the title Unbroken Circle come from? And did it shape your writing of this episode at all?
Well, there's an old folk song that is called Will the Circle Be Unbroken? And I have never had any idea what the fuck that meant, to tell you the truth. And I think it has something to do with a mystical cycle, but I really like the word unbroken that was always there. And there's a lot of circles in Station 11. And I just called it that. And, you know, for a while, that song
it's interesting at the beginning of this, you literally talked about circles, and I was like, oh, just like his episode.
Obsessed with circles, constantly talking about that.
Yeah, cool. So I wanted to end with discussion of your show, because you chose the very last scene of the series to talk about here. And there's a lot of great moments in the episode, but why did you choose this one?
It's my favorite scene in the show. And we didn't watch the whole scene, but because Mackenzie and Himesh are incredible collaborators, and I think kind of the experience of making the show, this scene really reflects how brilliant they both are too. You know, many of these ideas are their ideas, and there's a dialogue. We had some important things to hit in a very short amount of time, but this is the only scene in the whole show where these two characters as adults speak to each other. They're kind of separated in time and by the edit ever since, you know, a long time ago. And there's almost too much to say. They couldn't possibly say what needs to be said. So we got to pick a couple things, and what they played, they really threw so much away, but that term doesn't quite do justice, I think, to how expertly they're navigating the subtext, that everything is about what they're not saying. So we finally could do a scene that didn't rely on anything but two people talking, and they could almost, you know, apologize to each other without saying it, say I love you to each other without saying it, and say goodbye finally with saying it, which has been the thing that wasn't possible for them. So it just has all the things I love about the show, and two amazing performers I love, and it has the Wagons, our amazing production designers work, Ruth Ammon, and amazing costume stuff, and then it ends, I don't know if it's on this, with the needle drop, the Elton John needle drop, which our editor, David Eisenberg, pitched a full year before we got to production when he read the first drafts. I don't know, I think I didn't put it in there because I knew he was going to, but United We Stand. So like so many different people kind of work together to make the final scene, and it's my favorite scene.
So I'm curious how the ending of the series came to you, since it's not how the book concludes, and you've really made the bond between Kirsten and Jivan the glue that kind of holds it all together. At what point in the process did the ending come to you?
Well, I think you just answered it in your question. I think by knowing, you know, that the glue that held the show together was their relationship, that the only right place to end was their relationship, and more specifically, Kirsten saying goodbye. The entire show has been about how she has trouble with that and how she didn't get to with anyone. And so bye. This is the second bye, by the way, is Mackenzie. It used to be just bye, but she wanted to say it twice, and she does two very different things with both of them. I think I love the idea of a show ending with someone saying bye.
Absolutely. So I want to, I kind of want to dive into some of the description up here, sort of toward the top of page 57, stay on that page. Let's see, where is it? No, just kidding, 56. There it is, yeah. Where it says silence for a few beats. Then, as the idea of Lara hangs in the air, to Kristen, a spectral correlate, but a trusted ghost. Jivan is the bridge.
What in the hell am I talking about? I think there's a lot of shorthand there for the actors, because what that means, I had several conversations with them. So as the idea of Lara hangs in the air, it means there's a person who you care about more than me, kind of. Like, he has a wife now, he has a family now. And Kirsten's not the most important. The idea, so like that literally was a conversation the three of us had. The idea of Lara meant something. So it's code for what Mackenzie, I think, is going to be playing right there. But it's a good thing. Like, it's sort of, so Mackenzie, she played both the sadness of it, but then the kind of the maturity of knowing that, like, it's good for him that he has that. And it's sort of I don't know, it's a little ski slope for her. And it's a more kind of notes on what she told me her plan was, as much as anything.
Gotcha.
I was learning from her in every one of these scenes.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask, do you have like a sort of philosophy when it comes to stage directions or description? I
mean, I script a lot and then I change a lot too. And I think I like to make the scripts be visual. I do all the things you're not supposed to. I do the blocking in the scene work, and then, but a director undoes it, or the actor does, or I come back in and then we redo it, or the scene. So it's sort of like I take a specific point of view, but I'm glad to change it when we're standing there on the day. It just kind of depends on the space and the energy of the people and how it's falling together.
Gotcha. So Station 11 to me is a series about art and about putting our lives back together after a loss of everything. Not to put pressure on you, but I wonder if you could talk about what the show is about for you, and sort of bring us home with what being an artist or being a writer means to you. I'm sure everybody here watching this who's toiling away on projects would really appreciate it.
I mean, I don't even think it's really, it ends up being about art, but that's never how I think about it. It's just about taking care of each other and communities, you know, like recognizing that we need help from each other, mostly, if we're gonna be okay. And, you know, writers, especially, I think in this business, we're a community and we're fucked on our own, basically. And so I think it's very easy to get pitted against one another, financially, from so many different reasons, and you know, everybody's ambitious and wants to get the job, but it's very important, I think, for us to stay together and united and helping each other navigate very dangerous waters, you know. So getting nominated for an Emmy is amazing, but you know, like a competition between all these wonderful people is also sort of silly. I'm in awe of everyone who's been on the panel.
Likewise. So I think let's bring it back. We've got a few more minutes here. Let's bring it back to the group. And I want to just kind of, on that note, just kind of everybody, if you could share what for you has been the most rewarding thing about, you know, your respective projects. I think that would be a nice note to end on.
Sure, should I go since I've been talking?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I mean, I got to have a community throughout the entire pandemic that was sort of like an obsession bigger than the pandemic somehow. I mean, it wasn't bigger than the pandemic, but it was a way to be focused on a thing and make a thing that felt like it had meaning in a time when normalcy was out the window. So I got to have a community.
Who else?
We're a shy group.
Yeah, I guess so.
I'm trying to remember who said at the beginning about getting to make it again. Was it you, Sarah? Yeah, I feel like, to me, getting to do it again, I'm now I feel like it was so amazing to have this project to do during the pandemic, but also like I feel this way about all of our shows. They all had something to say. Like, I feel like we're still alive in there, you know, like that we still, as artists, we still want to talk. We want to share some stories. And so I found it like really encouraging, and that all of our shows were watched and they change people and people respond to them. It just feels like a really exciting time to be a writer coming out of this pandemic. Like, I don't know, I feel like I have a pulse. I feel a little bit alive again. And I think Maid gave me that for sure.
Who else?
I had a wonderful experience making this. I loved it. I loved telling the story. I felt like I was on a mission, this sort of dual mission, which was to expose the crimes of Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family's role in it to as broad an audience as possible. And I was so outraged by what this family had done to the country and how they'd gotten away with it, that it felt great being like, I'm gonna, like, you know, episode after episode, I'm gonna show you exactly what this company did, because they manufactured this, and they really did manufacture the opioid crisis in an incredibly deceptive, brilliant, criminal, genius way. And then at the same time, to give a new understanding of addiction, a new understanding for me, that people suffering from opioid use disorder, I don't know, 85% of them are victims of the lies that started with this company. And that was, and then what that does to your brain and how you can't just get over it, right? It's actually changed your brain chemistry. And so for me to understand that, I thought, it blew my mind. I thought, wow, what if relatives of people who suffer from this don't know this either? And what that could do for them and how cathartic that could be. And in fact, it's been one of the most rewarding parts of the show has been the emails that Beth Macy and I have gotten from people saying, I reached out to my son, my daughter, my mother, my sister. I haven't spoken to them in 5 years, 10 years. I hated them. And now I understand what they're going through. So that's been the most rewarding, I think, of this experience.
Liz got something to say.
I was gonna make a joke how I've gotten emails from inventors of blood testing devices. But I was also like very moved by what Danny said. So. But like I can't stop myself from like making.
Good job.
I say always go for the joke. You're good.
Oh God. You guys are so good. You're such good writers.
I know.
I'm too tired right now. No, I mean, honestly, I mean, to say what's been rewarding is like to be, you know, in company with you guys, to like what Molly was saying. I feel like there's been such amazing limited series, particularly this year, and like to be a part of this kind of group of people has been so incredible. And just getting to for me, like write something completely different. I think like it felt like in this industry you can just really kind of put in a box. And I think especially as a woman, you know, but just like that there's like, you know, one thing that you can do, and like for me to be able to kind of like do something, tell a different kind of story, it's given me an enormous amount of just excitement about the future and sort of what to do. And then also just working with Amanda and like being kind of, you know, finding that creative partnership with somebody, you know, someone who understands your tone. To me, it really does feel like, you know, like, yes, I love my husband, like, yes, I like, you know, but like finding like artistic love, like finding like somebody who like understands the thing inside that you want to say, and someone who can like bring that out into the world is, you know, just this incredible gift. And I loved all of your shows so much.
Likewise. Well, Sarah, anything to bring us home?
Can't possibly improve on any of that. I also love all of your shows. Yeah, Jesus Christ, I'm not going to compete with any of those things. Very, very well said.
Molly, what was the line that Steve McQueen kept?
That's a good
God.
question.
Okay. I'm trying to think of okay, so I will tell you, it was
You remember it? Oh, good.
No, I don't remember, but it was a eulogy. I do remember that. It was a 2-page eulogy of this character. And I think the line he kept was like, it was like, and we will never forget it. I mean, it was like the most TV line, but his point was you got to take all of this, put it into one line. You don't get 2 pages, you get one line. I don't remember the line, but Patrick, I'll look it up for you and I will send it to you.
I feel like
the line was, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
We'll see you at the reception afterwards. Yes.
I can't imagine a better note to end this panel on. Thank all of you so much. I love, as has been said numerous times, I love all of your work, and I just thank you so much for participating in this. And the insights were amazing, and have fun at the Emmys, I guess.
Lauren, thanks for your great questions.
Yeah,
Thank
great
you.
question.
Yeah, great job, Lauren.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.